Recovery podcast is real life stories from everyday people in recovery. From mental health issues, trauma, substance misuse, and behavioural addictions. Please visit the website www.lifeinrecovery.co.uk for links to social media and a range of books written by your podcast host, Ren Coy.
Hello and welcome to the Life in Recovery podcast, episode 70, with me, Ren Coy. Hope life is treating you okay and you're doing well out there. The Life in Recovery podcast is sponsored by Dennis Berry Life Coaching. So Dennis is a certified life coach who's been working with people all over the world for over 15 years, and he can work with anybody, anywhere via Zoom. He's an expert in addiction recovery and life mastery, and he's been clean and sober himself since 2003. And he can help you with your journey through sobriety and help you to achieve inner peace, success, and fulfill your life mission, whatever that may be. If you're sick and tired of being sick and tired and you're ready to make changes in your life, book your first free consultation by visiting www.dennisberry.com and use the code words Life in Recovery to get 10% off your next 3 sessions. The podcast is also sponsored by a former podcast guest and founder of sugaraddiction.com, Michael Collins. That was episode 20. He's helped thousands of addicts get and stay sober since 1985. During that time, his special passion has been to help recovering addicts who've turned to sugar after they got sober. Many recovering addicts struggle with weight gain, diabetes, and other health issues that all trace back to an addictive use of sugar. In most cases, quitting sugar is even harder than quitting drugs and alcohol. If you think you might need some help with your sugar addiction, Michael is offering a free copy of his book, The Last Resort Sugar Detox Guide, to all my listeners. I'm about a quarter into it, and it's seriously making me think about my use of sugar and how I'm going to quit. Just visit www.sugaraddiction.com/lifeinrecovery and download your free copy. And if you're really serious, check out his 30-day Sugar Freedom Challenge whilst you are there. The podcast is also sponsored by the Recovery Coach Training Academy from Helios Recovery. And this is for anyone who's interested in becoming a recovery coach. So recovery coaching is a form of strength-based, healing-centered support for persons in or seeking recovery from substance or behavioural addictions. Similar to life and business coaching, recovery coaching is a type of partnership where the person in or seeking recovery self-directs their recovery, while the coach provides their expertise in supporting successful change. Recovery coaching focuses on achieving any goals that are important to the individual. Helios Recovery Service is offering a digital recovery coach academy and ethics training on January the 25th to January the 30th, 2021. This training includes core competencies for recovery coaches with additional training on ethics, boundaries, medication-assisted treatment, gambling and more. Recognised as the original and leading recovery offering of its kind, the Recovery Coach Academy is a pioneering new approach to healing people's lives that is unlike any other training. Visit www.heliosrecovery.com and when you register, use the code words Life in Recovery to get 10% off the package price. Please don't forget that you can financially support the podcast if you're feeling generous. Go to www.patreon.com/Life in Recovery, and there's a few different packages to choose from there. I enjoy making the avatars for my Patreon supporters, and also if you want to dig deep, you can also appear on the podcast yourself. So check that out, patreon.com/Life in Recovery. Now, my guest today is almost like a Jedi Master. He has been sober for 40 years, and Anthony is just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to addiction and recovery. I absolutely loved having an in-depth conversation with him. I also mentioned during the podcast that I'm really pleased to announce that my new book, All Is One, The Science and Spirituality of Consciousness, has been signed to John Hunt Publishing for their imprint O Books, and it should be published the back end of summer 2021. So I'm really, really pleased about that. And I'm going to be doing some special giveaways of my old books in the near future. So yeah, without further ado, I give you Anthony Eldridge Rogers.
Well, I was born in the UK. Where was I born? I was born in London, actually.
Yeah.
But we lived. I was raised for the first few years of my life just outside of London, Buckinghamshire area, and but my childhood was very much about moving around. So I wasn't just raised in one place. I spent a few years down in the West Country, which is actually where I live now. And then I spent up in Warwickshire and then in London again, and then in Hertfordshire, you know, so it was quite a lot of moving around as a kid. That was really because of the, you know, what was going on in the family, really. That's what was driving all of that. So it was quite a turbulent thing, quite a transitionary, turbulent thing.
What was it that was going on in the family?
Well, no surprise, really, to say, you know, what was going on in the family was, you know, addiction, although none of us really understood that at the time.
Yeah.
Because I've been around recovery a long time, but I was blessed and fortunate enough really to get into recovery as a young person. You know, I was 20 when I got into recovery, but what really was going on was our family was blighted with addiction, mental health problems, post-traumatic stress syndrome, you know, and etc. So, like a lot of families, really, you know, it's a common story, and it's not a unique story at all. And but the family just couldn't cope. My family, where I was living with my mum and dad and my two sisters, fell apart because my mum got ill. And at the time, it was back in the bad old days where, you know, anybody presented with any kind of mental health, depression, anxiety, anything like that, they just like fill them up with Valium and, you know, the drugs, the miracle drugs at the time. And my mum went into hospital. No, she didn't actually go into hospital. She went to see a psychiatrist, and because she had postnatal depression, and they said, well, here, have some Valium. And it was like flicking a switch. She just, within a very short period of time, probably 6 to 9 months, went from, you know, new mum to, you know, budding prescription drug addict. And within 3 years, maybe less, our entire family had, you know, as we were, you know, 3 kids and my mum and dad, had completely fallen apart in very spectacular way, you know. So it was, you know, in her family, but she wasn't the only person in our family. My dad has never had an addiction problem, but there were lots of other rallies, you know, packed around us in previous generations, and particularly one of them being my grandmother, my father's mother, who was also addicted to prescription drugs and morphine, as it happened. So, you know, that was a bit of a strange one. But then, of course, morphine was quite available back then. So
answer for these doctors that are prescribing all these anti-anxiety and anti-depression and pain meds.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just such a big topic, isn't it? Because, you know, I mean, everybody, you know, everyone overwhelmed, societies and communities looking for a quick fix. And, you know, there's nothing easier than handing out a pill, is there? You know? So, but, you know, these doctors back there, I mean, in a way, I have more empathy and sympathy with those guys back then than I do with doctors now, really, because back then I think a lot of them didn't understand. They really did believe that Valium was a miracle drug, you know.
Yeah.
And so I give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't think they knew what they were, you know, triggering. But nowadays we do know what the terrain looks like. So I don't think, you know, I think it's pretty shocking, you know, what's going on.
Yeah.
But the mass medication of Western societies is a whole big topic all on its own.
It is, definitely. I mean, it's certainly massively contributing to the addiction epidemic, that's for sure.
Yeah, and of course, what's been going on with the opioid epidemic in the States, which I've been a little bit involved with in my work, you know, and that's truly tragic. What's going on there, you know, but. Back in the day, so where are we? You know, I was born in 1960.
Yeah.
So, you know, when my family fell apart, I was about 7 or 8 years old. And so back then it was really the dark ages. There was no addiction. I mean, addiction treatment back then was really satellited around lockup wards, lunatic asylums, and institutions, some well-intentioned but brutal other kinds of therapies. You know, it wasn't a good space to be in. And my mother fell into that space, and you know, had a really brutal 12 years of being institutionalized most of that time. About 7 to 8 years of that time, she was in various institutions all across the country, from lockup wards at Tooting Bec, you know, to all kinds of things and so on. So, you know, it was a bad time to fall into addiction and mental health problems. It's a bad time now, of course. It's never a good time.
Yeah.
But you know, back then, you know, there wasn't any even enlightened kind of perspectives on things like post-traumatic stress and so on. So, you know, it was a difficult time. I was going
to say, it must have been difficult for you being that age, with your mum kind of in and out of mental hospitals.
Yeah, it was. And as a boy, I was I have very strong memories of going to visit her in hospitals and sort of finding her lying in bed. And she was really heavily medicated. So it was a little, you know, one flew over the cuckoo's nest-ish. If you know what I mean, if you know that movie, everyone's just sitting there sort of zonked out, and she was, you know, like that as well. And it was really disturbing for me as a kid. And I think you know, my dad didn't know what to do. You know, he just sort of in one stroke lost his wife, you know. So yeah, it was a difficult time, and it got worse, I'm afraid, for me after that. So it was going to get a lot worse before it was going to get better. But you know, with hindsight, really, when you're born into a family that's struggling with those kinds of things, and you know, as a kid, unless there's people around you who know what's going on and can reach out to you and connect with you and sort of hold you in some other space, you know, it's very hard for children to navigate their way through it.
Yeah, 100%. You got no guidance whatsoever, have you? Just kind of like left to figure it all out on your own, and that's completely impossible. What were the things that happened then? How did it get worse after that?
Well, it got worse really because and really just very briefly, I'll go through this period. I mentioned I had a grandmother who was also addicted. Well, my dad's eventually couldn't cope, and he sent all the kids to stay with different relatives, and I was sent to stay for the summer holidays. He told me, with this grandmother, and she was living with my grandfather in a house in the middle of nowhere on a farm in Somerset, and she was, you know, just a truly dysfunctional human being. And I sort of went there for 4 weeks and was there for 4 years. In that period of time, we descended into a sort of psychological dystopian kind of hell, where she isolated me and intercepted all my mail from my family and, you know, gaslighted me, and it's just a really horrible story. But she was a very disturbed person. Weirdly enough, she was also really lovely. You know, she was really charismatic in many ways, and for little kids, she was lovely. But as soon as you know, grew up, she became quite a horror story. But, you know, she had a raging addiction, which she'd had for I'm guessing probably for 20 years. And she was constantly taking pills, took pills every morning. You know, as soon as she woke up, took pills during the day, took them at night, pills to sleep. You know, she was on Valium as well. She was also on other, you know, she was just medicated all the time. She also was taking morphine, which she got from a pet doctor. And her morphine habit had been developed through for a long time because of a thing called kaolin and morphine. I don't even know if it's around now. Do you know what that means?
Yeah, I heard of it, but I don't think it's around anymore.
Yeah, it was very popular during the Second World War.
Yeah.
And it's actually was given for stomach, to settle the stomach, and it's a mixture of liquid morphine and a sort of white powdery, what you might call like milk or magnesia kind of thing.
Yeah.
And of course, it was highly addictive. So, you know, she'd been on that for 20 years as well. So, you know, we just went into this kind of really crazy addiction psychological space, and which was very dark. My grandfather died 7 or 8 months after I arrived, so it was just me and her in the house, and we had a brutal 4 years together, which ended up with her trying to kill me and me having to escape. So it was pretty traumatic. And the good news is at 12 years old, I got out of there. But the problem really was, for me, so talking about me, not talking about her and them so much, was at the age of, shortly after my grandfather died, what would I have been? I'd have been about 9 and a bit. I discovered his stash of booze, and I started drinking it. And he had a lot of spirits and a lot of booze. And I pretty much drank it all over the next 2 to 3 years. And what I was doing was I was self-medicating, because I very, very quickly had discovered that the suffering I was feeling at the time was just completely taken away with a drink.
Yeah.
It was just brilliant. It was the most brilliant. It was the most brilliant thing I'd ever discovered as a kid, actually, because I could cope with what otherwise I was traumatizing me, and so I, you know, used to put this alcohol in my school lunch, orange juice bottle, and be gin, vodka, or whatever it was, you know, and then I could get through the day with this drink, and that's how I did it. And so that what that did was that set up the dependency. And actually, in a way, you could say it kind of saved me at the time, because I can't really say what might have happened to me psychologically if I hadn't had that, but I got through it by drinking.
It does save people, doesn't it? I mean, like the amount of times I've heard people say, I would have killed myself if it hadn't have been for the fact that I had my alcohol or my drugs. I mean, it's like you said, it's medication, isn't it? It's medication from pain, and your medication, you'll keep taking it until it stops working, basically.
That's it. And that's exactly the story, So it worked really well. It saved me. It got me through that dark period. But then, of course, inevitably, I became, I was dependent on it. And of course, eventually it turned on me. So that's the story, isn't it? And the gap between it being I'm just trying to think. I was asked the other day on a talk I was giving at what age I think it started to let me down. I think it was probably in my early teens, around 15, 14 perhaps, 14, 15, where where I would get spectacularly drunk, and things would happen that I couldn't control or anticipate. I'd go off for the evening and, on my bicycle, actually, because I went to live with my dad. So I went to live with my dad after my gran. My dad had remarried, divorced my mum, and remarried. My mum was still in institutions. And I carried on the drinking whenever I could, which was really easy. It was really easy to get booze from off licenses, or, my dad, bless him, even said to me, was I interested in making beer? And I said, absolutely. And so he and I we had a brewery in the garage. So, I had a home brewery. So, I had my own sort of, supply. So it was great. And it was really strong beer.
You're like your own drug dealer, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it was a bit more glamorous than, using the word drug dealer. But I mean, that's what was going on for me. I was getting through. You see, I think really the problem was that what happened was at about 7 years old, when when I was over the period 6, 7, 8, when the family broke down, that was really the first trauma for me as a kid, losing my mum. The second trauma was being sent to live with my grandmother and losing my family, because I didn't see my mother again after that for about 5 years. Yeah. And I didn't see my dad very much either whilst I was at my grandmother, because she wouldn't let them see me. And so that was the second trauma. Then what happened with my grandmother was like the third trauma. So by the time I came out of this, I was really very, very traumatized. Nowadays, you would have anyone with half a brain would immediately have diagnosed me with PTSD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've ticked the boxes as well for the adverse childhood experiences, haven't you? The Vincent Fillet's ACEs, it is obvious now, isn't it? I mean, whilst you were talking about, when you were taking the alcohol to school and your orange juice bottle and stuff, I was just thinking, how bloody dark is that? Because I've got a stepdaughter who's 12 who's just started going to senior school and secondary school, and I was just thinking, then imagine if Lillian was taking alcohol to school in a bottle to deal with life. That is just the darkest of thoughts. And to think that the alcohol had started turning on you by the age of 15, 16, that's so young. Yeah, it is. But of course, with hindsight, it was a blessing. But we'll get to that. But yeah, it was. But I think the point I think I'm wanting to make is that my story satellites really around the fact that it was all about managing how I felt. Yeah, and it was trying to make me functional in a social way. I was deeply scared of people as a young person. I'm very, very introverted and shy, and very, very suspicious of people, but also really good at reading people. I don't know if this is, I'm sure, something that you've talked about with other people and stuff, but when you grow up in dysfunctional families, where you become super aware and able to read situations with people. Well, I have that experience myself, and it's funny you should say that, but I've had a lot of instances recently where I've perceived things that have been happening around me, like with certain relationships, and then I've said to these people, such and such things happening. They've said, how do you know that? And it's almost like I've got a sixth sense for what's going on, but it's more to do with I'm acutely perceptive when it comes to like body language, people's movements, eye contact, all that kind of stuff. You become hyper aware of it, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And you it is like a sixth sense, and you can just walk in and you can scan a room and you can kind of quickly work out what where the threats are, what's going on. And actually nowadays, as an adult in my adult life, I'm almost uncannily accurate at spotting people with addiction problems, and that's not because they're drunk. I can even read it in people who are sober. It is weird. It's really very strange.
You can just see the telltale signs, like,
you can.
Very, very often. And interestingly as well, I mean, I wrote a book about 5 years ago called Addiction Prevention, which I'm actually kind of rewriting now, and I've just got a book published, and I'm hoping to get this first book published as well, so I'm kind of redoing it. And what my kind of theory that I basically talked about the fact that I believed that and still believe that addiction could actually be prevented if it's caught early enough in young children. So the premise was exactly what you just said then: emotional issues. So what I say, there's 3 stages of addiction. There's emotional disorder, which leads to mental health issues. The mental health issues then need medicating, and that's where the substance or behavioural addiction comes into play. And obviously we then get addicted to it, and then that leads to chronic addiction, dependence on the substance or behaviour. And what my premise is that, you know, around the age of kind of between 10 and 12 years old, I feel that if young kids were going through the 12-step program at that age, that they would, or not necessarily the 12-step program, but any kind of recovery program, it's just that I went personally through the 12-step program. I believe that that would give them the tools that would enable them to essentially develop emotional intelligence through the ability to talk about the feelings, you know, and essentially to just not pick up a substance or behavior in order to medicate themselves. Is that something that you would potentially subscribe to?
Yeah, I would, but I would add perhaps a perspective on it, because I mean, what's really engaged me for the last 25, 30 years really has been trying to understand how recovery happens. And so what I've got a couple of I suppose you could say favorite perspectives on it. But I think I think we cannot overstate the significance of the right kind of adult-child relationship at the right time with the right person, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's where so much of the problem can be mitigated if you're fortunate enough to have a person or group of people who can perform that developmental function for the child, and hold the space for essentially a processing of the experience of the child into a safe container. That's how I put it. And I think that I wouldn't go so far as to say that I would sort of frame it as a treatment, but I do, you know, I think it's Gabor Mate, isn't it, who says that, community is correlated with addiction.
Yeah. And
if I think about my life, well, what happened was collapse of community, collapse of the family, loss of connection with my dad, who was a sane person, a dysfunctional community with a primary dysfunctional person who traumatized me, and nobody to help me out in that experience until I sort of passed a threshold where the coping behaviors that I had been able to use, alcohol use, were too set in their ways for, and there was no one around me then to understand what had happened, because I didn't speak about what happened to me till I was in my 20s, because I couldn't.
Sorry, just going to say, so there's that need really for, if you haven't got a strong parent or parents or a strong teacher, there's almost a need for a mentor type, sponsor type person really that can help guide you through these kind of difficult situations. I totally agree with that.
I think, and I mean, I've met so many people in recovery and asked them their stories, and it's amazing how many people have sort of said, I met this person at this age, and that relationship saved my life in a way, and I've heard that many times, and I do think that it's very important. And I mean, there's another piece of information, which is that I lived in Africa for quite a long time, so I got quite involved in, so quite knowledgeable, I suppose you'd call it, about different cultural contexts and African cultural context. But there's a saying, which don't know if it comes from Africa, but it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
And I add on, it only takes one, very disturbed person to traumatize a child. But, that when you grow up in community in a village, you've got more of a fighting chance of having other relationships around you that aren't as dysfunctional as the one that you might be, stuck in as a child.
Yeah, because I mean, a huge component of it is trust, isn't it? Like, I mean, I had my dad on this podcast, and it was a very powerful episode. My dad's like 30 years in recovery, and he kind of, for the first time, we spoke about him not being there when I was a child, and it was there physically the majority of the time, but emotionally it wasn't there, and he could kind of see how that had developed, like kind of a bit of abandonment issues and trusting issues with me and stuff, and. In my experience, my first sponsor who took me through the 12 steps for the first time, he was the first bloke that I'd ever trusted in my life. Mm-hmm. And, it was such a massive thing for me to like speak to this guy about all my issues and all the, like all my deepest, darkest secrets and stuff. And unfortunately that relationship ended. And actually in hindsight, I can look back and I felt as though he broke my trust a little bit at one point, and and he probably didn't really, but at the time that's what I felt, and that was it. That was the end of the relationship as far as I was concerned. And it's taken me kind of years and years of having a couple of different sponsors to regain that level of trust now with my third sponsor. But I wouldn't say that I, like often I'll hold things back still because I still haven't got that full trust.
Yes.
It's something that it will probably take my entire lifetime to be fully trusting of, even with my partner, I trust my partner implicitly, but there's times where, that distrust can raise its ugly head still.
Yeah. Yeah. And I identify, with what you're saying there. And it took me, I couldn't even talk about, what had happened to me, fully until I'd been in recovery for 10 years. It was that complicated for me, and it was really just because when I was the awful dilemma of getting in. So I got into drugs and alcohol stopped working. I fell out of school. I got involved in the punk scene a bit. I got involved in the drug scene in the home counties in Aylesbury, then up in London, and everything went out of control, really, really quite fast. But what really was going out of control wasn't so much the drugs and alcohol, but it was me. I was having to pedal faster to try and keep the emotions away from me. Yeah. So it was a zero-sum game, right? Because I thought, the more effort I put in, the less return I was getting. And what I had a sort of, it's funny as how things work out, because I mean, I owe the start of all this disaster, was because of my mum, but I also owe my recovery to my mum, because she was, in and out of these rehabs, and she came out of one not rehab. She wasn't in rehab. She was in, mental hospitals. She came out of one, and she went off to see her pet doctor, who'd been, busy writing scripts for her over the years, and private doctor. And he said to her, you know what, I've just recently been told about a place that helps people who've got addiction to drugs problem, and I think you might be addicted to all these drugs I'm prescribing for you. So,
who'd have thought it?
Bless him, so he said, I'm going to send you down to this place, and can see how it look. And that turned out to be, I think, the first 12-step rehab in the UK.
Right.
Down in Western Supermare.
Yeah.
And what that did was it sort of started to bring the whole active addiction house tumbling down around us, really. So my mum goes in there and discovers quite quickly that her problem is really that she's addicted to all these drugs. So they detox her, and then she looks around at her devastated family and sees that all her kids are addicted to drugs, because my two sisters at this point, my elder sister's got an alcohol problem, and my younger sister, who's tragically got a street heroin problem, and she's only 14 years old. So, which is a whole another terrible story that turns out well, by the way. Terrible story that but so my mum was around, and so she calls me down. I go down to family group, and basically the sort of the and it's really strange with hindsight. I sort of knew what was going to happen. But what was going to happen was I was going to have to confront not only what had happened to me with her, but also what was going on with me, and that kind of started the whole process of me ending up in the rehab as well. But what became apparent to me was, and this was the awful experience that I had, was that once I was taken away from all my meds, I was in agony, psychological agony. And it was horrible, really, really, really horrible, and really tough to go through, and because I couldn't turn it off, and that was really the story of my first few years in recovery. Was grateful that I wasn't drinking and taking drugs, because obviously I didn't have all the consequences of that, but I was barely functioning as a human being. I mean, I was terrified of everything, terrified of my shadow, I was scared of everything, and was locked up in a shame box a lot of the time, feeling ashamed of myself all the time. Do you know that thing where you're just trapped by all of that stuff, and just not knowing how the hell I'm supposed to get out of it, and not relating really to people around me. Back then I'm going to 12-step meetings, and everyone's saying, I'm feeling great, I'm in recovery, and I'm going, no, I feel like a shit. Am I in recovery?
I definitely know that feeling. 100%.
And they're getting pissed off because everyone's feeling the good, and I'm like, no, I'm not fucking grateful.
Yeah. Well, I always say I was homicidal and suicidal. That was how I felt. I definitely relate to that. I mean, it's unbearable, isn't it? Initially, you take away the medicine, and then you're just left with yourself. I mean, and I always say as well that addiction's on a gradient. The people that kind of that end up on the streets homeless, with usually with particularly bad heroin or crack cocaine habits, or the person like yourself that was drinking themselves to oblivion at such an early age. I mean, it always equates to the amount of trauma that they've suffered. So obviously when you take away the medicine and they're then left with that amount of trauma to deal with and nobody to help them with it, I mean, that is often where people do kill themselves.
Yeah. Well, let's go there. So in 19, so I stopped drinking and taking drugs in 1980.
Year of my birth.
There you go. But I've got, with hindsight, I've got severe mental health problems, depression, anxiety, a little bit of OCD, PTSD. I've got it all, and there's no one really, I'm too scared to talk to people. I avoid getting a sponsor because I feel too shame bound around it. It's impossible, but I'm also raging inside as well at it all, and I got nothing to turn it off. And this goes on. I would say, actually, it's fair to say that it gets marginally better over a few years, and I managed to I managed to sort of put a life together of some kind, but it's very stop start, and I'm constantly sort of making money and then getting broke, and so it's very hard and tiring. But eventually I just feel like I can't go on. I just feel, and I won't go back. It's interesting, this one. You see, I won't go back to drugs and alcohol because I'm too angry, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm too raging at drugs and alcohol. It's a weird thing, isn't it? Because it was also my friend, but I've seen it. My mum's in recovery now, don't forget. So my mum's doing well now. She's put her life back together. She's got remarried. She's on her way to becoming a pillar of the local community. She's running a charity. You know what I mean? So it's my mum's doing really well, but I'm not. But I'm in this rage that is keeping me sober. I don't know if sober is the right word. It's keeping me off drugs and alcohol.
You've fallen out with it.
Yeah,
you've fallen out with it big time.
Yeah, I have, and even when I do think about doing it, I don't think about drinking to stop the pain. I think about drinking to kill myself. That was an important distinction to me. I would never. I'm not going to go back to drinking. If I drink, I'm going to buy 25 bottles of vodka and 28 pounds of drugs, and I'm going to kill myself. That's how my head is.
Yeah.
Back then, and it's all because really I'm not getting treatment for what's going on for me, and I can't talk about it. I just can't find a forum to talk about it in, and I can't talk about it in 12-step rooms, and I can't talk about it in because it feels like I live with a volcano, emotional volcano inside of me, and it feels, when it starts to come up, it feels like it's going to kill me. That's what it feels like. It feels like it is going to kill. I let that genie out of the bottle. It is going to overtake me, and it's going to just I'll never come back from that. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty dark place. And then, of course, as is the way of the world, whatever you believe, I'm fortunate enough to have the right conversation with the right man at the right moment, And that was a therapist, a counselor therapist, somebody told me about, and I just rang this guy up because I'm desperate and I don't know what to do. And I haven't had any counseling or therapy at this point. And I rang this guy up, and I think he calls me back, and he just said, and I'll never forget this. He says to me, I sort of can hardly speak on the phone. I'm so emotional. And he says, he asked my name and says, Anthony, and he says, I've left a message saying I'm in recovery. He says, you're in recovery. And he says, yeah. He said, how long have you been in recovery? And I said, 9 years. And he said, okay. And he said, it's bad, isn't it? And I just sort of grunt on the end of the phone. And he said, and then he proceeds to tell me what's happening to me. And he says this, he just says, this is what I think is this what's going on for you? You can't cope with your emotions. You feel it like you can't talk to anybody. You feel like you're fucking up your recovery. You know what I mean? And as he's talking, I'm starting to weep. And he says, sorry about that noise there.
All right.
And he says to me, come and see me tomorrow. I can help you. And I go. And I spend the next 2 years of my life crying.
Sure.
In grief. I start crying that day, and I hardly stop for about 2 years. So, and he it was just incredible timing. And he got me he was running this small group of people like me, but of different ages. I met two men in that group, one of whom I'm still very good friends with now. And that was the beginning. That was really the beginning of recovery. That was the true beginning of my way out of the hole,
Yeah.
And
it's that that empathy, isn't it? Like that just that level of compassion and empathy, and it's just that conversation that you have with another person that that's also recovering is essentially a therapeutic conversation. It's no wonder your floodgates opened.
Yeah. And so, I mean, now, of course, many years later, and I the work that I do, I work as in the kind of behavioural health field, and I've been able to give that gift to others, of being able to really see that trappedness, and particularly in the recovery, because you see, the recovery process plays out very differently for everybody.
Yeah,
but there are some sort of collective milestones, and I'm sure you know this, but there's quite a lot of people who relapse around the sort of 8 to 10 year mark.
Yeah.
That's not a coincidence. There's reasons. I end up sponsoring, and supporting quite a lot of people in that place who kind of like going, what am I doing wrong? It's like it's not working for me, and I can't go on feeling like this the rest of my life, and chasing that feeling away. And that feeling doesn't get chased away by, one of my favorite sayings in 12-step literature is, social respectability is not recovery. Well, it isn't. It isn't a car and a house and a job. I mean, that's nice, but that's not recovery.
No, it's not about the material.
No, it's not.
Interesting that you've got into this, because this is kind of what I wanted to pick your brains about, really. I mean, I'm 10 years in recovery, and you're 40 odd years in recovery.
Well, 40, yeah.
40 years, yeah. And, like when I was kind of about 4 or 5 years in recovery, a guy that was about 20, 25 years in recovery said to me, for the first 5 years, you're kind of pulling your head out your backside and, having a look around and kind of getting to know yourself a little bit more. He said, and then from 5 to 10 years, you start to grow into yourself. And he said, by the time you reach 10 years, he said, you'll kind of be the person that you always wanted to be. And, providing that you're doing the work and, and keep it. He said, but it is like similar to what you said, you can find that life can become a bit of a struggle again. And, there can be certain areas of your life that you have to start working on, or you could even become a little bit apathetic towards a lot of things. So it's important, that you keep doing the work. And I've always remembered that. But from kind of like where I'm at now to where you're at, what's your, what's been the story? What is there any kind of hints and tips that you can give people, once they've kind of reached that milestone of 10 years as to how to keep changing and growing and evolving?
Yeah. Well, a nice big question there. Thanks a lot. Well, there's lots of pieces to it. And I think that the real challenge that we're really talking about is what is the process of knowing yourself. And if you think about most of the successful-ish recovery settings are built around this idea that the degree to which we know ourselves, are self-aware, and are willing to examine what it means to be, Anthony or Ren or, John Jack, whatever. What does it mean to be me, a human being right here, right now, having this life experience? It's reaching for that which brings about this understanding of or how we function, if that makes sense. And that's what, if you think about the 12 steps is very cunningly, cleverly set out to take us down a path of self-knowledge, right? Mm. I mean, it doesn't say, you're powerless over your addiction. Step 2, forget your past. Do you know what I mean? There's nothing you can do about it. It doesn't say that, and just forgive yourself and move on. It doesn't say all these things for a reason. And the reason is that what is unresolved in us, what is painful in us, seems to be stored in us, and it will drive and haunt and if you like, control us as long as it is unresolved. And so the 12 steps say, well, let's go back and take a look, and let's find out who we are, who we've been, and from there, let's see who we can become. But it then sets a very, very clear bar, which it says who we can become essentially is enlightened beings. You know, I mean, and I'll put another word in there, which a lot of people go, oh, how can you say that? But, you know, it says what it offers us, the 12-step program in particular, and other programs. So I don't want to make this just about 12 steps, but I'll just talk about 12 steps for a moment. What it offers us is freedom and power. And the power part is what people, you know, often mistake, because what it does is it offers that you can embody spiritual power. It's spiritual power. And that power isn't directionless, it's focused. And so that power, you know, we pray for the power to practice, you know, principles in our affairs and carry the message and so on. We pray for power to do that and the power to carry it out. And it's the most undiscussed part often of 12-step stuff. So it's about empowerment. Recovery in the 12-step context is about empowerment, illumination, self-knowledge. And then it's all about service. And we know that it's about service. So that's the philosophy. That's the kind of, you know, and that philosophy's got its roots in, you know, going back a few thousand years. It's got its roots everywhere, really, across the philosophical landscape in many respects. So,
yeah, they definitely also call the available spiritual and religious knowledge and just kind of ground it down into one amazing program, didn't they? Yeah,
yeah, and it is an amazing framework. It doesn't fit everybody, and you know, I'm not advocating it for everyone, but I'm saying that it's a powerful thing. But the point I'm trying to make is your question speaks to. So if we hold it as that, then we can say at any point in our recovery or our you know, human existence, where am I in that, in embracing and living and embodying and with that. And normally when I've done that check-in with myself, I've always discovered that the reason I'm uncomfortable, the reason that I feel like empty and bored or whatever it is, through to downright depressed and scared, is the degree to which I'm somehow disconnected with a framework that is coherent within the context of where I've come from and where I'm trying to go. And it's that disconnection that is where the problem lies. And I think what happens was I was a late starter, if you like, in recovery. It took me lots and lots of years just to get very little distance. And then I had this big dip, you know, around heading for the 10-year mark. And then I was crying for a couple of years, and then recovery started. And so I then had to go and learn things and so on. So I was very distracted in many ways by my own problems. I was still very self-centered, if that makes, in a good way. I don't mean that critically. I needed to be self-centered because I didn't work very well. You know, I was trying to figure out, you know, I had my head underneath my own bonnet going, why do I, when I walk in this, you know, I'd walk across town to go to a party, get to the door, hear the people inside, have a panic attack and have to go home, you know. It's like, please, you know, I don't want this for myself. So, you know, bonnet up, what is that all about? So I was very self-centered, but eventually that abated, and I started to find that I could function and put things together. And then and then of course the next stage came, was like, well, if I can have more in this life, because up until then I've been broke and I hadn't been able to put anything together coherently, business or work wise or career wise. And then I thought, well, maybe I can get a career. So then I became very career focused, and I became quite obsessed with making money. And so I learned how to make money, and I became pretty successful at it. So that box was ticked. But then I realized, whilst I was making all the money, so there, you know, there I am sitting there, you know, I'm in South Africa at this point, and I've got a half a dozen houses and cars and this and that, and, you know, 3 businesses and and it's a miracle. If you'd met me then, I'd have said, Ren, this is a miracle. You have no idea. I mean, when I was 18, I was living in my car, you know, and do you know what I mean? I was a junkie, you know, and look at me now. Look at me, you know, But the truth was, I, just as I looked at all that money and stuff, I knew that wasn't it either. Do you understand? Yeah. But I had to go through that stage to get that. I had to know, oh, this is what it feels like to have lots of money and be able to buy anything pretty much you want. Yeah. This is what it feels like. Yeah. Oh, and as simultaneously, it's not enough.
Yeah, it's still empty, isn't it? Even if your spiritual life isn't vibrant, then it doesn't matter what you're doing. Like all the material things in the world, you could have them, but you'd still feel unfulfilled.
Exactly. And I suppose, it's a cliche in a way, isn't it? Because we can read that on a bumper sticker, but well, we can, can't we?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, just go online, look up quotes about money. You'll find, hundreds of things which say the same thing. The thing is, when I joined, one of the things I hated about 12-step fellowships was old timers who talked in bumper stickers.
I'm just going to say that there's many bumper stickers in 12-step fellowships.
You're as happy as you make up your mind to be.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck off. Do you know what I mean? Listen, you haven't had my childhood, mate. You know, that's what I'm thinking. I'm obviously not saying that. But of course now, I simultaneously understand the truth of that statement, that there's something about choice and how we operate inside ourselves around choice and happiness and selection of emotion or content, all these things.
Sorry to interrupt you very quickly, but that's that power you were talking about as well, isn't it? Because recovery gives you the power to choose.
Yeah.
And that is the bit that you don't have when you're in active addiction. You have no choice whatsoever because you're completely governed by your emotions, your mental health and your cravings. Yeah. Whereas in recovery, because you've got that kind of buffer, like as they say, God is in the pause.
Yeah.
You've got the ability to actually choose. And even if you're doing, like I talk about this all the time on the podcast, the one thing that I still do, which is damaging to my health, is eat chocolate, and sometimes I'll binge on it. And I know what I'm doing. I have that ability to pause and to think, I shouldn't really be doing this. I go through that argument and I still do it, but I never even had that choice in the past.
Yeah, exactly. It's the self-knowledge, isn't it? It's that, and it's about cultivating the part of yourself which can observe yourself, which is a very powerful tool as well, because it's obviously one of the tenets of meditation and meditative practices, which I have been following for most of my recovery. But interestingly, I became a Sufi. I don't know if you know anything about Sufi.
Of course I do, yeah. I'm very, very into the whole spiritual path, so I've done lots of research around those areas, so Sufis I'm very, very big into,
Yeah. So I mean, if we just sort of maybe we'll jump a track here and talk about what we've been talking about quickly from a spiritual perspective.
Yeah.
So I have a moment of clarity just before I go to rehab, where I see my life in front of me and I see two paths, and left is drugs and alcohol and what I'm doing, and the right is the one that leads somewhere else, but I don't know where. And it's like a part of my mind opens up and closes down. But in that moment, I make a choice. I'm taking the path I don't understand. I'm not going, because the drugs and alcohol one, I know where that leads. Yeah. The other one I don't, and I take that one. And there've been various moments in my recovery where I've had one of these aha moments
of
insight. Yeah, like a moment of insight which arrives and changes everything.
Yeah.
And one of those was when I went to see a Sufi teacher in London called Irina Tweedy, strange name, and she somebody invited me to go there, and I just went, and I immediately knew I was in the right place. And I spent some time with going there. I used to go there every week. She had open houses, go 2-3 times a week, and you could just go there and meditate, and she would do a little talk, and I used to talk to her a little bit. She used to talk to me, and her particular branch of supervism, if you like, was basically about the path of the heart. So it was about the heart chakra. If you're into chakras, it was about essentially coming from compassion and love for self and the world.
Yeah,
that was it. There was no ritual. There was no chanting. There was no dressing up in nice, fancy clothes. There was no structure to her. There is no structure to her branch of Sufism, that branch of Sufism, except meditation on the path of the heart. So, and it deeply chimed with me because it was so stripped down. It was just so simple.
Yeah.
And up until then, I'd been doing a lot of, I'd got addicted to yoga at one point, which I gave up because I recognized I'd become addicted to it. And what that meant was, if I didn't do my yoga at the time of day that I thought that I said I would do it in the way that I said I would do it, I would start to have anxiety and self-harming attacks.
Yeah.
And I quickly recognized that I was getting psychologically hooked on yoga because it was going to fix me, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So when I found, Tweedy, what I found, but the reason this links back, it was because what I discovered was the power of self-observing. And from that moment on, that period on, I decided to become my own experiment in that sense. It was like I said, I'm going to observe myself to figure out why on earth I do what I do and think what I think and behave the way I behave.
Yeah.
And because I'm going to get to the bottom of this, because there must be, and I just had this sort of instinctive feeling that would be possible. And that's really the position that I've stayed with for all of that period, even when I suffer, because I have suffered in the sense that life has happened to me.
Yeah.
I've been divorced. I've had tough moments, and I've responded in different ways. But I've never lost that ability to say, "Wow, look what's going on, and what might we learn from that?" And you know what I mean. And I've always been willing to take that position. So
I've got a couple of questions for you then, as to off the back of what you just said. So, like I was talking about, Mike, I still got, my addictive tendencies in certain areas, which can manifest for various reasons. Do you have any of those addictive behaviors still? And if so, what are they? And also, with your kind of self-inquiry, have you pinpointed any one particular thing, or is it a multitude of things that, lead to your kind of destructive behavior patterns?
I'm going to reframe your question slightly like this, because the way I see it is this: do I still have a mechanism that generates an impulse in me, a behavioral impulse that sparks a behavior to change my feelings in a manner which may or may not be destructive? The answer is absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely, yes. However, what has happened over the period of time is this ability to observe it, a bit like you were saying. It's like, oh, here, well, Ren's eating chocolate. Do you know what I mean? It's like, how's he feeling? He's feeling a bit pissed off, or whatever it is, or he's not. He's feeling great. He just wants chocolate, whatever. It's this ability to hold, rather than get engulfed by that. I shouldn't be eating chocolate. I feel bad. I'm eating chocolate. Oh God, it's my addiction again. Do you know what I mean? It's keeping the space inside yourself to observe it is important. What happens over time is not that any of your, my character defects, let's put it that way, my character defects haven't gone away any more than my past has gone away, any more than the emotional ability to emotionally recall to some extent my experiences of the past haven't gone away. But But what has happened is I have been gifted through, in a way, mysteriously gifted with the power to not be lost to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So they don't consume you.
Yeah. And I'm not vulnerable. I'm vulnerable to it, but not in the same way that I was before. For instance, I can still have a shame attack. So, and that's when you do something. I'm going to describe what it means for me, just in case listeners, want to know. I'll stretch myself in some way. So I remember, for instance, the first time I went and gave a talk at a conference. I was the speaker, and I was very scared of doing the talk, but I did the talk and it went well. But afterwards, I had this terrible feeling of exposure and shame.
Yeah.
And a part of me was going, "Oh no, I can't believe I got up there and did that," and I felt really, really exposed and vulnerable, and I went into this pit of shame. Now, in my 20s, I could go into a shame pit and stay there for 3 months. Literally, it would completely incapacitate me. Now, I can be in there for 5 minutes. It can literally, the cycle of that attack, my ability to recover, my ability to self-care and love myself, sorry, and it can be as short as 5 minutes.
Yeah, so it's increased awareness, basically, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Thank you for answering that, because I presumed that would be the case. I mean, that's been my experience in recovery, has been that progressively I've got better, in inverted commas. I've become more aware of myself, my character defects, my behaviours, etc. And the more effort I put into my recovery, and specifically, praying, meditating, taking inventory, helping others, the more aware I become and the more power I gain in the ability to choose not to do the destructive things that hurt myself and, and the people around me. And also the ability as well to apologize quickly, if I do make a mess of things, or if I do, I don't know, I might have an angry outburst or anything like that. It's just that ability to be able to go, do you know what, I messed up there, I'm really sorry, please forgive me, and move on, which is kind of like an alien language when you're a person like me who's just full of pride and arrogance.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to talk about step 10. So, which is an incredibly powerful tool for recovery.
Yeah.
I always say, to people I sponsor and stuff, I say, listen, do you want to do another 5 step, 5th step, 4th and 5th step? Right? They're like, well, no, not really. I say, listen, you do your 10th step well enough, you'll never have to do one.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And it boils down to that, because ultimately, when we're, one of the things I've really tried to do, particularly in the last 20 years, I wasn't so good at the beginning because I was too shame-based, but certainly for a long time now, absolutely rigorous. If I feel like I've transgressed, done something wrong, behaved inappropriately, been unkind, cruel, whatever it is, with whoever, I immediately will reach out to them and say, look, I think maybe I was out of line, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I do it with my kids every night. If I behave badly, snap to them, say to my kids, listen, I just want to, before we go to sleep, here's the thing. I realized that I snapped at you earlier, and I didn't mean to cause you any pain, but if I did, I apologize. And, tomorrow I'm going to work even harder on not doing that. And I've done that every day with my kids, every day, if necessary. Obviously, great days go by when I don't have to do that, but and that has been the most amazing tool, because it builds all sorts of good things around who you are. It stops you feeding the shame monster and the guilt monster and the I want to hide and the constructed self thing. It just deflates it constantly.
Yeah, so absolutely. Well, I'm really big on doing it. I do a written inventory every single night, and I send it to I just do it on my phone, and I send it to my sponsor, and I also do a gratitude list at the end of it, because you know, it's not just about kind of looking at the stuff that I need to change. It's also about, you know, being grateful for the things that I've got. And that's one of the biggest tools in my arsenal, really. I mean, I think, you know, going back to what you were saying about, you know, between the 8th and 10th year, a lot of people relapse. My experience of that is through going to meetings for all these years has been that people either have never done or stop praying, meditating and taking inventory. And, you know, like there's so many people that I know in recovery across the country and across the world really, that never meditate, they never take inventory. And as a result, they're still quite, well, they're unmanageable basically, and it's a very, very simple practice to get into, but really difficult. It's difficult to get going a lot of the time. You know, I've got a sponsee who struggles to kind of you know, do it consistently, and I just keep saying to him, like, at the end of the day, look, I said, I'm not telling you to do anything that I don't do, and I know the benefit of this because I do it every single day of my life. Like, I've got a good friend in recovery who says I never take a day off, and I've adopted that philosophy. You know, I've had experiences over the years of not meditating for a few days or weeks, and I've had experiences of not praying, and I've had experiences of not taking inventory, and I always feel terrible when I don't do those things. So, you know, I just say to him, you wouldn't not brush your teeth, you know, and that's the way I look at it. I look at it like brushing my teeth. It's an integral part of my day.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that, but you know, the thing that, you know, I come back to is in 12-step parlance is the promises. You know, one of the things that I felt very strongly once my recovery, as it were, started proper in the sense of, you know, as I described, was I became, by then, by the way, I'd been to a lot of funerals. I mean, I'd been very involved in NA. I'd helped start some of the early meetings, and you know, I'd got involved in that, and I think it was, you know, HIV was a big issue, and I'd been going to a lot of funerals.
Yeah,
you know, it was a tough period, and you know, I felt, and I started to kind of reflect on how come I'm still standing, and other people who I would have thought wouldn't have fallen. You know. Why am I still here when clearly so many other people aren't? And in order to make sense of that, in a sense, I still try to honor the answer to that question every day now, because I have such an incredible life. I mean, I'm so grateful for my life, and I'm so, you know, I'm gonna, you know, I mean, my gratitude list is just like, you know, overflowing. You know, it's like, it's just incredible, and it's like, you know, slap me, Ren, for Christ's sake. How did this happen? You know, that's how I feel about it. But so I'm like, wow, I'm so lucky. I'm so blessed, and you know, I feel this really strong sense of that this is really the, you know, the spiritual side of the program coming, you know, active in me, in the sense that, you know, if we pray for anything, whatever our higher powers, we pray knowledge of the will of that power for us, and the power to carry that out. And I think I do know what my mission is in life, and I do feel like I've been granted powers to carry it out.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing, I mean, you know, you got this podcast, which is amazing, and you're putting into the space, and you know, and I'm guessing that that's part of your purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. I realised that.
I didn't want to assume there.
No, I mean, everything that you've just said completely resonates with me, and I actually took a break at the beginning of the year. My daughter was born, and I decided that I was going to take a break from the podcast, possibly for a year, or I might have, you know, never come back to it, because I wanted to spend as much time with my daughter as I could. And what I found was, obviously the COVID thing hit and we moved into lockdown, and I was spending loads of time with her anyway. I found that I really missed it. And, you know, my partner kind of was speaking with my partner, and she said, you know, all you need to remember is that is one of the main ways that you help people, and you get so much out of helping people. So just, you know, just keep doing it if that's what makes you happy. And I love it. I love doing the podcast. I love writing my books. And Yeah, I mean, one of the, I've got this philosophy, which is that the meaning of life is to live a life of meaning, and this is what gives my life meaning. And I think it's really important that we find that, and you clearly seem to have done that.
Yeah, and it's so funny you should say that, because I've got a book coming out shortly called Meaning.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and basically, I developed a coaching model called meaning-centered coaching, and it's really basically, and it came out of some research we did into recovery. So, so good question is, what are the characteristics? So if you imagine a group of people like yourself and other people who are making a success of recovery, been in a dark place and come through it and come out of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do we think are the common features of those people? Yeah. And generally speaking, so that was the question I started to ask, and we did some qualitative research on that. And what we came back with is that the one thing that seemed to be present in all of these people was that they could articulate and lived lives attached to what had the most meaning for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so you rarely found somebody in long-term recovery who said, my life is hopeless and meaningless and empty. You're right. Yeah. And if they were saying that, you need to sort of reach out to them, because they're probably about to take some drugs or do something bad. So there is this correlation, isn't there, between meaning and connection to it, and this powering through your life in the way that people do. And so when I saw this correlation, I thought, well, if we are going to work with another human being, whether we're sponsoring them, whether we're mentoring them, whatever we're doing with them, if we can help them explore, find out, and live their lives close to meaning, that will give them the power, that will give them energy. Because when you're doing something you love and it's important to you, you have energy, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, let's do it. I want to do that. I want to make a difference in that way. Then you get energy. And when you get energy, you get movement. When you get movement, you get learning. And when you get learning, you get recovery, So I kind of thought, wow, this might be something great. So I developed this little model, and, that's what I've written a short book about. So
brilliant. Well, I'd love to, I look forward to reading that when's it going to be published?
I think maybe in March.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, but I'll keep you posted if you're interested. That would be great.
I'd definitely be interested in having a read of that. It sounds right up my street. And the last question that I ask of all my guests, Anthony, is, what does life in recovery mean to you?
Well, I'm going to be a bumper sticker, and I'm going to say life in recovery really does mean love and compassion, and every day I wake up with people that I adore who love me, and we're in a mutual love society. And the work that you do, the work that I see other amazing people doing, it's really all I see: love, and we care. We want to make that contribution. We want other people to come back from these difficult challenges. So that's what I'm holding my hand up for. That's what recovery means to me.
Beautiful. Well, thanks very much for your time today, Anthony. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Where can we find you online?
Well, I've got, a website, and I've got a couple of different websites. Jump for Fly is a project that I run in the creative space. So you can find me on Instagram if you look for Anthony Eldridge. You can, and also if you look up Jump for Fly, you're going to find me, because there's no other thing called Jump for Fly online.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, and if you've been affected by any of the issues discussed in the podcast, please see a range of mutual aid organisations in the show notes. Also, don't forget that you can support the Life in Recovery podcast by visiting patreon.com/Life in Recovery, and the podcast is sponsored by Dennis Berry Life Coaching. Go to www.dennisberry.com for your free consultation and use the code words Life in Recovery to get 10% off your next 3 sessions. Also, go to www.sugaraddiction.com/life in recovery and download your free copy of the Last Resort Sugar Detox Guide. And if you're really serious about quitting sugar, check out his 30-day Sugar Freedom Challenge whilst you are there. The podcast is also sponsored by Helios Recovery Services, the Recovery Coach Training Academy. Visit www.heliosrecovery.com to register for the Digital Recovery Coach Academy and Ethics Training, which is on January the 25th to January the 30th, 2021. And when you register, use the code words Life in Recovery to get 10% off the package price. Peace and love, and goodbye for now.